Thank you, Leska Curran. Thank you, Minister McGrath, for allowing me a few minutes on Budget 2019. In relation to the area of local government, there's been a significant increase of €60 million, up from €125 million to €185 now in terms of direct support by central government provided for in this budget for 2019. As with most other government departments and agencies, a lot of the expenditure relates towards pension and pay matters, and also it's worth pointing out, I suppose, in particular when it comes to local government, that the contribution of the central exchequer directly is but a small part of the overall fund. In 2017, the last year for which full figures are available, €477 million was collected in the local property tax. All of this money being spent in local authorities around the country annually. The commercial rates collection in 2017 was €1.34 billion. Development levies from that year, €212 million. All of those figures will increase, and some indeed very substantially, into 2019, which will mean that well in excess of €2 billion will be expended by each of the 31 local authorities across the country in the various headings and functions that local authorities provide. One of the key announcements in the local government sector in terms of funding in the budget relates to fire and emergency services, where the government has allocated €12.4 million for those services for 2019, an increase of almost €2 million from what was spent last year, following on from the reports that have been conducted and indeed that are in train, looking at the fire safety measures that are necessary and that are available presently and that should be available in the future in our local authority housing stock, but also in other public and indeed private buildings right across the country. It's also important, as we face in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a local government reform bill which will primarily focus on expansion of Cork City and amalgamation of Galway City and County Council, which the budget makes provision for increased funding to ensure that those measures can be pursued and executed. We also face into the prospect of plebiscites in May of next year in 3 local authority areas, in Limerick City and County, Waterford City and County and Cork City, for directly elected mayors. A rebalancing of both function and role between the executive of local authorities and the directly elected member, which would see in the future executive powers being exercised for the first time at local government in Ireland by somebody who's directly elected by the people. That's provided that the people vote for it in those plebiscites. A key measure that's also included in Budget 2019 is the re-establishment of a fund for estates to be taken in charge. I don't know, was it 2013 or 2014? A €10 million fund was ring-fenced as a once-off payment to local authorities, available on application by them, to ensure that estates that were nearly finished, not ghost estates, estates where there might have been issues with footpaths or street lights or the surface of the street, or indeed wastewater and indeed water issues. And many local authorities have continued on that work out of their own resources sense, and we're happy to be in a position now where there will be once again support available from central government for the taking in charge process for the many hundreds of estates that were built across the country during the Celtic Tiger years, and most of which are still in private hands and not controlled by the local authorities. Under several of the housing initiatives that are included in Budget 2019, one that will be, I suppose, will have a fundamental impact at local authority level is the Service Sites Fund. The local authority will take an equity stake with the buyer to be repaid over time or when the house is sold, and the applicants will be selected openly and transparently by each local authority who's providing those homes. It is fair to say that in many parts of the country, while housing land stocks are low, many local authorities do have suitable housing lands, often located in smaller towns and villages around their local authority areas. And this Service Sites Fund will be targeted specifically at those areas. And what's also important is that once the purchasers of these houses make their repayments, and indeed once they buy out their house, it will be retained in a separate fund by the local authorities, a ring-fence fund which will provide a rolling fund for affordable housing into the future. The other thing that's going to take effect from the start of 2019, and isn't a revenue generation mechanism in and of itself, but it will generate some revenues for local authorities, is the vacant site levy. It kicked in from this year, but the actual collection period starts from January 1st next year. And it is, and I'd welcome what other members are finding in their own local authority areas, but I know in many areas around the country it has led to planning applications finally being lodged and inquiries about building much needed residential accommodation in each local authority area across the country. As I said, it will also provide some limited additional funding for local authorities into the future. Another key measure in the budget is Exchequer funding for housing adaptation grants being increased to €57 million. This will enable up to 12,000 home adaptations to take place right across the country. These are vital grants, often for the most vulnerable, often in the most isolated parts of our communities that are administered by local government. And the increase in its budget by central government is very, very much to be welcomed. €13 million funding ring fence for specific traveller accommodation schemes, including the provision of additional group housing measures. €32 million fund for the remediation of a further 460 houses affected by pyrite, and the announcement of a similar scheme for those affected by the mica issue, particularly in the northwest of the country. I also want to welcome the announcement this morning by Minister Ring of pilot schemes to encourage more people to live in some of our provincial towns. 6 towns were selected, one of which I'm delighted to say was Callan and Kilkenny, which will aim to ensure that the centres of some of our market towns that have suffered so much over the last 10 or 12 years will once again see the new life of new accommodation and refurbished accommodation, bringing people once again to live in those town centres. Thank you.